Welcome, everybody, to the big questions. Now, yesterday was Holocaust Memorial Day, with this year's theme being the power of words. And words like anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist have been particularly troubling to the Labour Party over the past couple of years. And now, since the recent elections to Labour's National Executive Committee, there have been words bandied about the new head of the Disputes Committee, Momentum Director Christine Shawcroft. She's been criticised after the committee she chairs only gave a warning to 2 cases involving anti-Semitism last week. Does the left have a problem with anti-Semitism? Sol, you left the Labour Party.
I did.
Why?
I left the Labour Party because I'm half Jewish, I'm married to a Jewish woman, and we have a Jewish son. And as Jews, we felt that the Labour Party was no longer the place that we thought it had been. We'd been Labour voters our entire lives and been party members, trade union members and campaigners.
Where's your evidence?
Well, that's a really good question, Nikki. So, evidence. Now, a lot of the debate about anti-Semitism is complex, and I don't expect everyone in this audience or everyone at home to understand the ins and outs of what can be a really complex debate. But it's not that complex, really, if you boil it down. So I brought along some evidence. So it's always good to have evidence rather than just opinions. So here's some evidence of things put on social media by either Labour Party members or Labour Party officers or even Labour Party elected representatives. So the first one that I've got in front of me here, a Labour Party member who's also, by the way, a member of the group, one of the groups that Naomi represents, which is called Free Speech on Israel, has tweeted a video, "The Holocaust and the Phony 6 Million." I know that the official version of the Holocaust regarding systematic extermination...
That's my organisation.
That's a member of your organisation.
It doesn't represent the organisation.
Well, it's true, so we wanted evidence, that's evidence. Here's a post from a Labour member.
One more then. Yeah, go on,
okay,
one more.
The government are corrupt, this dates back to 2015, and David Cameron is part of a Zionist elite group of morons who are obliged to feed their Zionist Jew masters. Just your typical evil Zionist.
Naomi, just come back on that, because whenever we do any debate like this, it is so divisive. It sometimes turns into a shout fest, and I'm going to try and be absolutely square down the middle with you here. So I wanted to give everybody a fair shot. Some accusations there. Let's take it back. We've seen this stuff on social media.
Yeah, we certainly have. It's horrible.
But it's horrible.
Yeah.
Let's take it back to the central question. Does the left have a problem with anti-Semitism?
Key question. First of all, there is a problem with anti-Semitism in our society, as there is a problem with rising racism of many different kinds. I think the evidence shows that Muslims are a much more vulnerable target than Jews are, and that the Roma, Gypsies, are even more vulnerable than the Muslims. There's been a recent study by the Pew Research which shows that 7% of Brits have negative opinions about Jews. I think it was 48% have negative opinions about Roma, and around 30% have negative opinions about Muslims. That's horrendous, and of course it's rising and it's terrifying. The right is on the rise, and we can see it in America.
What about the left?
Okay, I'm going to get into that. The one problem that we have on the left is that we're being asked to redefine anti-Semitism. I know what anti-Semitism is. I'm sure everybody in this room knows what anti-Semitism is. It's hostility, prejudice or discrimination against Jewish people.
I've got it.
Jews.
Let me focus on this as a question.
Yes.
Allow me, if I may. Sorry to point.
Yes, that's okay.
Focus on this as a question.
Yeah.
If you say that I am not in any way racist about somebody's ethnicity or about Jewish people, but I do not think that the state of Israel should exist as it currently exists. Is that anti-Semitic?
It's not, because Israel is not a person. You can only be racist against an individual. I do not deny, however, that much of the language that some people ignorantly use...
So denying self-determination...
members of your own group.
On this particular point, denying self-determination of Jewish people
no, because why would it be? If I were to say about any other group in the world, well, I'm not sure. Are they really a nation as a group? I don't know. I mean, in the case of Jews, okay, my 4 grandparents came from Eastern Europe: Russia, Poland, Germany, Ukraine. No connection with Middle East whatsoever. Fine. Many Jews lived in the Middle Eastern countries. They're Arabic-speaking Jews. They share an Arabic culture. They like Arabic food. There are people in New York who love bagels. Are we a nation? It is debatable.
I'm sorry,
it is
it's not the Naomi Wimbledon show, I believe.
No, it isn't.
So let me interject here,
Let me come back to Saul. I'm just mindful, and Sheila in just a second, I know,
haven't said
and Chris
anything
Mullins too.
anti-Semitic.
This whole notion about saying that the State of Israel does not have a right to exist.
I didn't say that.
Is that, what did you say?
I said that the right of self-determination is something one can debate.
Right.
Without
is that anti-Semitism?
So on the left, as people brought up on the left,
is that anti-Semitism to say that?
Well, you know what? If you want to wear a badge that says I'm not anti-Semitic, but of all the people in the world, I refuse to grant the right and respect the right of self-determination to the Jews alone, then wear the badge. Wear it with pride if that's where you are. But that's what it is. It is no more. It is no less than that. And I think it's really important, Nikki.
Okay,
just
let him respond. We've got time.
I think it's really important. Now, for people watching at home, ordinary, decent British people who haven't spent their lives in the internecine wars on the extreme left, this is all a babble and it's confusing. And it's really confusing if you get someone who's Jewish to pop up and say, no, it's not anti-Semitic to say or to do X, Y, and Z. But I think it's really important that everyone watching this programme understands that the voices of people like Naomi with her tiny grouping, they represent an extremely tiny
I'm the wrong kinds of Jew, I saw.
Please let me carry on. You represent... Now, look, I respect your right to have your view. Of course you have your view.
It's very gracious
Jews are a pluralist group like any other group, and you exist, but
we're not all Zionists, are we?
Tiny fringe of extremists. You don't represent the vast majority of Jews in this country. The Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Jewish Labour, the Jewish Leadership Council, the Chief Rabbi, Reform synagogues, Liberal synagogues, United synagogues.
Let's take it to the Labour Party. Anatoly MP, I'm just wondering, is there not a parallel here? It's if you criticise Israel...
But none of this is criticising Israel.
Right. Well, this is where the line is. This is the interesting line, but where the criticism of Israel itself seeps into anti-Zionism, seeps into anti-Semitism.
Jews celebrate Christmas singing Jesus.
If I may. Thank you.
Sorry, Nick.
It's all right. I understand the emotive nature of all this, of course. But Anna, is it not the same? If you criticise Israel, it's not anti-Semitism, just as it's perfectly legitimate to criticise Islam as a religion, but it's not Islamophobia. There's an absolute parallel there, isn't there?
Well, firstly, I mean, I want to say I'm heartbroken to hear Saul and other members of the Jewish community who have lost faith and lost confidence in the Labour Party. We have had over 100 years history of standing up to prejudice.
Are they right to lose faith and confidence?
Well, this is the point I want to come on to. Our values have always been about tackling prejudice, about tackling racism, about making sure that everybody has freedom of speech and tolerance in this country. I'm a Labour MP because I believe in those values, and that's the kind of society I want to build. So I'm heartbroken both to see the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, but yes, I do believe there is an issue on the left. There is no problem whatsoever with criticising Israel's domestic policy, its foreign policy, settlements, human rights. You can do that to Russia, you can do that to China, you can criticise America for its gun crime. We are free and at liberty to criticise and challenge any government around the world, but we have to think so carefully about the language that we use, and that's what Holocaust Memorial Day is all about this year, because as soon as you start lifting it out of criticism of a government policy into the kind of anti-Semitic tropes that we've seen for centuries around wealthy Jews pulling strings,
Jewish lobby, controlling the media,
exactly.
The Rothschilds, the banking dynasty. We hear all of those.
And this is just profoundly...
And they're creeping back into social media.
Grotesque.
What's anti-Zionism?
Well, it's a really difficult definition because if you believe in the state of Israel, in theory you're a Zionist. And Emily Thornberry this week came out and said, yes, Jeremy believes in the right of Israel to exist, therefore is he a Zionist. It's Labour Party policy to believe in the two-state solution, therefore, we believe in Israel's right to exist.
Do you believe in Israel's right to exist,
Can I just say, Nikki, though, when the term Zio is used as a term of abuse, and that's when it's about language escalating.
If you believe in Israel's right to exist and self-determination, are you a Zionist, Chris?
I do believe in its right to exist. I mean, you could have a discussion about whether it was a very good... The Balfour Declaration in the first place was a very good idea, but Israel is a fact of life, and we have to accept its right to exist. But I do think we've got to another problem here. Two issues have become conflated. The kind of abuse you can find by doing what Saul's been doing, trawling through the internet.
And it doesn't take long to find it.
And a discussion about the Israelis is now one of the most right-wing regimes that it's the most right-wing regime that Israel has ever had. And it's in the process of setting up an apartheid state. And I think we ought to be allowed to talk about that. They've colonized the West Bank illegally. They're beginning to ethnically cleanse East Jerusalem, and they've herded many of the Palestinians into Gaza, Bantustan, for all practical purposes. And I think I've heard plenty of Jewish people use the word apartheid state. There are plenty of people in Israel who oppose what's going on, and I think those of us who are not in Israel ought to be allowed to use the same terms without being accused of anti-Semitism. And when I was in the House of Commons, the two most critical people, people who are most critical about all this, were Sir Gerald Kaufman, Jewish, and Harry Cohen, also.
But you're setting up a straw man, Chris.
And yes, they've got an answer to that too. They call them self-hating Jews.
They call them self-hating Jews. Allow me, so can I go to the audience? Yeah, the audience think about that. Sheila, right back with you in a second. I'm going to go around a few people. Your arm popped up. Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
It was something that Chris Mullin said there. What was it?
Well, his accusation that Israel is an apartheid state. Minorities in Israel constitute nearly 20% of the population and have exactly the same rights as Jews. And those rights are there and enforced.
They cannot live in certain towns, they cannot drive on certain roads.
You know, this is exactly the kind of thing, it's exactly the kind of thing that the interruptions here that confirm the truth and the question that we're debating here today.
Why does it confirm the truth of the
Because saying something that people like Chris Mullin or Naomi disagree with, and they start interrupting straight away. Now, my son has lived in Israel, lived in Haifa for over a year. He's lived effectively in an Arab section, generally Arab because it's an older section, that there's a mixture of Christian Arabs, Muslims, Druze,
Let me take it back. Does the left have a problem with anti-Semitism?
Oh, yes.
Lady over there, yeah.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to say that the Labour Party in its current form has been the most critical government of Israel's racist and apartheid policies against the Palestinians for a very, very long time. And this clearly scares the pro-Israeli advocates, I suppose, who don't believe that there is an issue. From my time in Palestine, I was appalled at the way Palestinians were treated at the hands of the Israeli government and the soldiers. I spoke to mothers who were forced to give birth at Israeli checkpoints because they were Palestinian. 350 Palestinian children are currently illegally incarcerated in an Israeli prison against the UN Charter for Child's Rights. Now, I'm a lawyer. I've read the Geneva Convention. Article 17, Article 33 forbids Israel from using collective punishment.
How do you feel about those terms which are creeping into social media more and more and more? And some people say from the Jewish lobby, control of the media, banking, the Rothschilds, very quickly. How uncomfortable do they make you feel?
They make me feel uncomfortable. I am not denying there's a problem with anti-Semitism. However, the Home Affairs Committee report released recently stated that the majority of anti-Semitism is coming from far right-wing groups and behaviour associated with that.
This is the thing, isn't it? It's, on the one hand, anti-Zionism, people say, comes from the left, and anti-Semitism from the right. Sheila, you want to come in here?
I do want to come in because I think if we get away from the state of Israel, anti-Semitism has been on the left for a very long time. It's been throughout all political parties in this country and generally amongst the populace. Right back in 1905, the Aliens Act was introduced because of the Social Democratic Federation in the East End rising up against what they saw as Jews coming to the country. Some people say that Karl Marx showed anti-Semitism in Capital, and indeed one could make that argument. So I don't want to just concentrate on the left because it is everywhere, but we need to understand that the language and the stereotypes are absolutely in Jewish history. In the early 1980s, I was in a Gentile group against anti-Semitism because of anti-Semitism in the Women's Liberation Movement, because in Spare Rib magazine there was a representation of Israeli soldiers as blonde-haired and jackbooted. We saw that as anti-Semitic, and it was very, very difficult to argue against it. So I don't want to talk about the exact accusations of what other people are saying now, but it makes no sense to try and not look at anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. We're particularly shocked when it's on the left because we don't expect that.
Yeah, go on, Jerry.
I'm Jewish by background, and I wouldn't in any way describe myself as a friend of Israel. I'm very much a supporter of the Palestinian cause. But as an anti-fascist campaigner over the decades, I would say back in the 80s, the anti-Semitism was very clearly identifiably a far-right phenomenon, and it was in the Tory party, and it was in sections of the left as well, and the communists and so on. What's happened in the last few years is this, and you can monitor it on social media, is that anti-Semitism has shifted leftwards, and there's absolutely, I don't know what's happening within the Labour Party, but certainly last year when people were identifying themselves as Corbyn supporters before the election, there was a lot of anti-Semitic tweeting from people identifying themselves as Corbyn voters. They may be confused. Corbyn is very much a populist phenomenon, so not everyone backing him is a left-wing, is a socialist and so on. But, you know, absolutely there's been a shift from the far right to the left of these ideas.
Guy there, then I'll come back to you, Saul. Yeah, go on.
So, in terms of the issue on anti-Zionism and Zionism and the right of states to exist, in international law there is no such right to exist for any state. The United Kingdom doesn't have a right to exist, the State of Israel doesn't have the right to exist, France doesn't have the right to exist. There is no such right enshrined in international law. However, I want to bring it back to the anti-Semitism issue and talk about it because it is a problem on the left. I've been campaigning on this issue for a number of years, and I believe that, you know, whilst the Institute for Jewish Policy Research has said that, you know, there is no more problem of left anti-Semitism as the rest of society. The issue is that on the left, there is broadly a denial that anti-Semitism is an issue. There's a dismissive attitude towards Jewish people who raise the issue of anti-Semitism, and we're not treating this with the sensitivity that it needs. Okay. And I think that the left need to really educate themselves on how to recognise and tackle this issue as best possible, and to be proper allies to our Jewish compatriots, because that's the way forward.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Can we talk about the question of racism? Because anti-Semitism is a form of racism, and what frightens me as a Jew is oh, it's not. This is excuse me. I'm sorry.
Not political.
Yes.
View.
Okay.
You interrupted me, so I'll interrupt you.
Do not deny her ethnicity. Whatever political viewpoint she may embrace.
It's got nothing to do with
it.
Because
Jewish people need to be very wary of rising racism, because it affects them alongside all other victims of minorities, vulnerable minorities. I want to look at the way, historically, Jews have approached this terrifying racism which has existed, and the tropes about Jews have indeed existed over centuries. It dates back to medieval Christianity, a lot of it. We had a choice at the end of the 19th century. Were Jews going to adopt a new model, is that political Zionism, which was very much a minority ideology at the end of the 19th century, or were we going to decide that we should fight alongside others who suffer injustice in society? And there was a split. So the Zionist movement decided to look for an imperial patron, to find a state where Jews could go and set up their own nation.
We haven't got time for the whole narrative.
I'm sorry about that. But do people understand that there is an extensive movement in Jewry, a socialist Bund movement, which was a mass party in Poland. There are people who died fighting the Nazis as anti-Zionists, and when people use the fact that Jews have suffered in the past to justify what Israel does to the Palestinians, Palestinians also have a right to self-determination.
Yeah, but we hear this.
Completely.
We hear this.
Israeli racism needs to be challenged.
Excuse me, while we've got the time in this debate, we hear this phrase, the word the Holocaust applied to what is happening to the Palestinian people.
I didn't say that.
But people do, you hear it all the time. You see it all the time. Does anyone say that that's an appropriate word? Does anyone here say that that's an appropriate word? Well, no, but it's a word we hear far too often, and it's deliberately, Anna, isn't it? It's deliberately insulting and demeaning to Jewish people.
Yes, and this is exactly Holocaust denial, talking about revisions of Holocaust interpretation.
Can I just put in a point? Whatever you think about the plight,
this is a calumny against people from...
Naomi, I'm coming to Anna. No. Whatever you think about the plight of Palestinian people, by any international definition, it is nowhere near being a Holocaust. That's the point, but people use the word all the time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and it's all about the language that we use, and I think it's really depressing that in any debate around Israel and Palestine, all too often the language is inappropriate, and it's used to historical, victim status is used to justify and against the Israeli state, to say, you know, they're just doing this, they're justified, we let them off because of this, or they use it as an excuse to carry out the behaviour they're doing. These are anti-Semitic, this is anti-Semitic language, and it's deeply inappropriate. And when we're discussing a really sensitive issue, we have to be very thoughtful and take the situation as it is and apply the same highest rigorous standards to looking at the policy of the Israeli state as we would to any country around the world.
Do we do that, Chris Mullen?
Well, no doubt some people do. I think there is a small problem on the left, but I think it's rather less than the problem on the right and perhaps in society as a whole. But there are two new dimensions, I think, in the last 3 or 4 years. Well, in the case of digital media, the rise of digital media makes it much easier now to express whatever foul prejudices you have on any subject under the sun, including anti-Semitism. That's one factor. But the second factor, and this has only arisen in the last 3 or 4 years, is that there are some on the right of the political spectrum who see this as yet another stick with which to bash Jeremy Corbyn. Well, you saw it all.
Chris, let me come in there, because I think that's a really key, I think it's a really key point. So there, what we have an ethnic minority, and Jews represent 0.3% of the population in this country. So that's 99.7% of the UK population are not Jews. Most people will never have met one. So here we have a situation where that tiny, tiny ethnic minority puts up its hand, and the process, believe you me, is profoundly disturbing and uncomfortable, and it's a hateful process. And you put up your hand and you say that the people that I thought were on my side, I'm hearing some of those voices, not all of those voices, but some of those voices that are saying and doing things that are expressly anti-Semitic, like some of the examples that I read out. And what you would expect there from how you would expect the left to respond with any other ethnicity is to go back to anti-racist first principles. You listen, you think about the language, as Anna said, and you make sure that you listen and you use the Macpherson principles about treating something as if it's a racist incident.
And that's not being applied? That's not being applied? That's
not being applied. Obviously, because what's happened there, Chris is a great example, has given us a great example of it there, of saying that when Jews, like me, stand up and say there is anti-Semitism coming from the left, you don't stop, listen, think about the language and take it at face value. You say we're lying because we want to do down and bring down Jeremy Corbyn and the left. Would you do that about any other ethnic group? I think not.
If it was happening with any other, we would.
We have to leave it there. I've been doing debates like this, on this topic, for 30 years, and there will be another chance. Thank you all very much indeed. If you've got something to say about that debate, log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions. Follow the link to where you can join in the discussion online. Please do contribute on Twitter as well. That's going to be lively.